Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. We are now into 2025, and so what I like to do at the start of every year is take a look at some album anniversaries. So today, I'm going to be ranking the top 20 albums from 1985 in rock and metal, turning 40 this year. Let's get things started. Coming in at number 20, I'm going to go with Asylum by Kiss. 80s glam metal Kiss is a mixed bag for sure. This is Kiss taking notes from what was popular at the time. Hair metal acts on MTV, who ironically probably took a lot of influence from Kiss back in the 70s. But this is not top shelf Kiss by any means, and Gene Simmons is pretty checked out at this point, focusing more on acting, but there are still some really strong tracks on here, like King of the Mountain's really strong, Who Wants to Be Lonely, Any Way You Slice It, Tears Are Falling is good, Secretly Cruel, so there are some good deep cuts on here, and I love the thunderous drumming by Eric Carr to kick off the album on King of the Mountain. Also, this is the first Kiss album to feature guitarist Bruce Kulick as an official member. He was a session musician on Animalize and then filled in for guitarist Mark St. John on parts of the Animalize tour prior to Asylum. So, I think this was a great lineup. I think Kulick and Carr worked really well with Gene and Paul, even if the material isn't in the upper echelon of the Kiss catalog. It's some of the band's most poppy material for sure. Probably an album I shouldn't like, but I do anyway. I think we all probably have albums like that. So, coming in at number 20, I'm going to go with Asylum by Kiss. Number 19, Come Out and Play by Twisted Sister. The success of their previous record, Stay Hungry, really served, I think, as a double-edged sword for Twisted Sister, who now had the impossible task of trying to follow it up in 85. And there were definitely some missteps the band took along the way, on this record, I think that hurt them a lot more than it helped them. For example, Dee Snider shaving his teeth into fangs, and the band making the odd choice to cover Leader of the Pack, which definitely does feel out of place on this record, especially amongst, an album full of gems, in my opinion, by Twisted Sister. Like King of the Fools is great, Out on the Streets, which I always thought would have been a big success for them as a single. It's very Dokken-esque. The Fire Still Burns and Be Cruel to Your School, featuring the return of Alice Cooper back in the studio pre The Nightmare Returns, which I always thought was a really strong collaboration. And it's just another fun listen here. Not as strong as the band's previous stuff, right? Not as strong as Stay Hungry, not as strong as You Can't Stop Rock and Roll or Under the Blade, but still far better than, some of the album tracks and singles like Leader of the Pack or You Want What We Got would suggest, and so I really dig it quite a bit. Coming in at number 19, gonna go with Come Out and Play by Twisted Sister. More cheesy, harmless stuff here at number 18 with Invasion of Your Privacy by Ratt. Their sophomore record here was to follow to Out of the Cellar from the previous year, and much like its predecessor, this is a glam metal essential with classic tracks like Lay It Down, You're in Love, and What You Give Is What You Get. Some really great guitar work here on this record by Warren DeMartini, one of the best guitarists of the hair metal era, and, wickedly underrated just in general. This is a, very commercial record, but a very consistent listen, very fun as well from top to bottom. In 1985, Kreator burst onto the scene with my number 17 here on the list, Endless Pain, a great debut album combining elements of black metal and thrash into one, inspired by the likes of Venom, Merciful Fate, and Bathory. And, the trio of Mil Petroza, Venter, and Rob Fioretti were so young here and just unleashed in the studio with one of the angriest and most exciting albums of the year. And it's such a raw-sounding record, keeping with the tradition of most thrash debuts having a low-budget production value, but I think it adds to the intensity of the record, especially on raging tracks like Total Death, Tormentor, and Flag of Hate. Coming in at number 16, I'm going to go with Worldwide Live by the Scorpions. Just a stellar live album here by the Scorpions at the height of their popularity, touring Love at First Sting, and they're a great live band even to this day. I'd love another chance to see them live again, but as good as they were when I saw them back in 2023, they were a live force in their prime. Klaus Meine sounds incredible on lead vocals on this record, and this live album features some of my favorite renditions of classic Scorpions tracks like, The Zoo, Big City Nights, Loving You Sunday Morning, just to name a few. So, great stuff here by the Scorpions. Fantastic live album as well. Wanted to put it on the list, even though I don't normally include live albums. I will make the exception on this list for a couple of entries. I'll get to another one in a little bit. I'm sure you guys know what that is already, but coming in at number 16, going to go with Worldwide Live by the Scorpions. Following that up here at number 15, I'm going to go with Walls of Jericho by Helloween, their first full-length studio album, and the only in the Helloween catalog to feature Kai Hansen as the sole lead vocalist for the entire record. Just a blistering debut here. here, really laying the groundwork for German power metal as we know and love it today. And, it's some of Kai Hansen's best work in general, in my opinion, with tracks like Heavy Metal is the Law, Metal Invaders, Ride the Sky, and Walls of Jericho. Excellent debut here before the band would bring in Michael Kiske for the next record to really take them to the next level on the First Keeper album. And fun fact, due to a manufacturing blunder, side one of several cassette copies of Walls of Jericho accidentally contained the music of Celtic Frost to Therion, which I can imagine was probably very confusing at the time, but don't worry, we'll get to that record in a little bit. Number 14, let's go with Under Lock and Key by Dokken. I have a hard time choosing my favorite Dokken album most of the time because their 80s output was just so strong. Sometimes it's Back for the Attack, other times it's Under Lock and Key, but Under Lock and Key is probably their most consistent album in their catalog, and excellent guitar work here by George Lynch, who really elevated the band's sound to something I think a bit heavier than their 80s hair metal counterparts, and of course Don Dokken in his prime was a real powerhouse of a vocalist as well. There are some real earworms on this album, like Unchain the Night, The Hunter is great, one of my favorite Dokken songs of all time. Slipping Away, In My Dreams, Lightning Strikes Again, It's Not Love, Don't Lie to Me. Such a catchy record with, a lot of memorable moments and a lot of releasable qualities to it as well. Number 13, let's go with Power Windows by Rush. It's the follow-up to 1984's Grace Under Pressure, seeing the band continuing to pursue a more synth-heavy sound here, incorporating the addition of sampling, electronic drums, a string section, and a choir. Definitely a record that, took me a little bit of time to get into, to really enjoy it, a few listens for sure. It's one of those records that, you need to listen to it multiple times for it to grow on you. It's a grower of a record, but, I love the synth-oriented experimentation going on here as the band were really branching out into a number of different directions, maybe a bit more art pop, a little new wave as well. I dig it. I think the precision instrumentation by Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neil Peart really stands out, and I really dig tracks like The Big Money, Territories, Manhattan Project, Marathon, and more. Number 12, let's go with Fly on the Wall by AC/DC, a raw, powerful album by AC/DC during a bit of a down period for the band creatively. Fly on the Wall admittedly was not as strong as the first three albums with Brian Johnson, those of course being Back in Black. How do you follow that up? But they did with For Those About to Rock and then Flick of the Switch, which is very underrated. But I think this album gets an unfair rap from a lot of critics even to this day. It's a very gritty sounding record and, one of the heaviest in the AC/DC catalog as well. The production is not great and probably the reason why it's not in my top 10, but the material is very overlooked on this album. I love tracks on here like the title track. Shake Your Foundations is great as well. Sink the Pink, Stand Up, Hell or High Water, Back in Business has got such a powerful chorus, so really strong stuff on here. I think the material is strong, the production not so great, produced by Angus and Malcolm Young, but overall a strong record nonetheless, and a very overhated album in the AC/DC discography that definitely doesn't deserve all the hate that it gets. Coming in at number 12 here, let's go with Fly on the Wall. Number 11, To Therion by Celtic Frost. I told you we get to this record, the first full-length studio album by the Swiss extreme metal legends, and a massive part of the developing death metal scene at the time. It was a groundbreaking album for black metal as well. And this album really is a very balanced mix of all facets of extreme metal. You have some really thrashy tracks like Circle of the Tyrants, and some really well-crafted early death and black metal on Jewel Throne, Eternal Summer, Fainted Eyes, and more. Great stuff from a young Tom G. Warrior and company that really sets the tone for not just the Celtic Frost catalog, but the future of the burgeoning extreme metal scene as well. Moving into the top 10 here, I'm going to go with Hell Awaits by Slayer, one of Thrash's best sophomore efforts, and Slayer definitely took some massive strides forward with Hell Awaits compared to their debut, Show No Mercy. For example, the budget for this album was much higher after Show No Mercy became Metal Blade's highest-selling album to date at the time, and it's also a bit darker and more progressive for Slayer. Definitely a record that I think was ahead of its time, but spawned some great tracks that still hold up to this day. Songs like the title track, Kill Again, At Dawn They Sleep, which in my opinion is one of the best thrash metal songs of all time. Also here you have Crypts of Eternity and Hardening of the Arteries, so it's fantastic stuff, produced by Brian Slagle and Slayer. Coming in at number 10, getting us started in the top 10, gotta go with Hell Awaits. At number 9, we have another great second studio album here with The Return of the Darkness and Evil by Bathory. A super important album to the first wave of black metal, very much Venom influenced here with standouts like The Rite of Darkness, Revelation of Doom, Total Destruction, Son of the Damned, and more. The production is, not great. That's due to poor recording circumstances of the record, but has all of the charm of old school black metal in its formation here, really capturing the essence of that movement and what it would grow into in the years to follow. And for a lot of that, you have to credit acts like Bathory, Venom, Hellhammer, and more. So coming in at number 9 here, going to go with Bathory and the return of Darkness and Evil. Very important record that, like I said, would pave the way for the first wave of black metal. Number 8, let's go with Spreading the Disease by Anthrax, the band's first full-length studio album with new vocalist Joey Belladonna, replacing Neil Turbin on lead vocals and really bringing the band to the next level. This album is more thrash metal royalty, and the album where Anthrax truly arrived in the eyes of a lot of people. Neil Turbin does a fine job on Anthrax's debut, but Joey Belladonna was a much better fit for the band, in my opinion, and some standouts on this record include classics like AIR, Lone Justice, Madhouse, Armed and Dangerous, Medusa, and Gung Ho. One of my favorite Anthrax tracks of all time. Just really heavy, thrashy way to close out the record. And just great stuff by Anthrax in general. Turning 40 years old in 2025. And hopefully by the end of the year we'll have, some new Anthrax material to talk about. But until then, this album is timeless stuff. Coming in at number 8, gotta go with Spreading the Disease. Well, this is a coincidence. Coming in at number 7, we have Seven Churches by Possessed. One of, if not the first death metal albums to exist. Seven Churches is hands down one of the most important releases in death metal history. Sort of the big bang of death metal that got everything started, combining thrash with early death metal style. And it's safe to say that without this record and, some of the other classics by the first wave of death metal that this album predates, death metal as we know and love it today would probably cease to exist. Clocking in at just under 40 minutes. This is an aggressive, brutal album with standouts like The Exorcist, death metal, the title track, Evil Warriors, and more. And what's crazy to me about this record is that Jeff Becerra and Larry Lalonde were only 16 when the album was recorded. I mean, that's nuts. By the way, if I sound terrible in this video, it's because I'm fighting off a nasty cold, but I don't need no doctor. Coming in at number 6, we have The Last Command by WASP, and yeah, I know, I don't need no doctor, wasn't on The Last Command, but that's just my transition to saying, hey, I sound terrible, but also WASP are cool, right? The Last Command, guys. WASP avoided the sophomore slump here with The Last Command, maybe a bit more restrained in lyrical content compared to their debut record, but still in the same vein as self-titled from 1984. Blackie Lawless is a great songwriter, and this album is tons of fun. I love tracks like Widowmaker. I think that's a fantastic song that should be played live a lot more often. Fistful of Diamonds, Jack Action, the title track, and Ball Crusher, in addition, of course, to the hits like Wild Child and Blind in Texas. This is the first WASP album to feature drummer Steve Riley, and the last with Randy Piper on guitar. Love the album cover here. That's an iconic shot of Blackie Lawless on the front. And WASP were a band, I've said before, that should have been, far bigger than they were, but they just shot themselves in the foot with the wrong kind of press right away that made it very hard for, I think, a lot of record labels to, invest in, right? But, I'd say this is probably the most commercial era of the band. This and Inside the Electric Circus, probably the band at their most marketable, with Blind in Texas and Wild Child becoming massive hits for the band. But all in all, this is a stellar record here, and Wasp are a band that I don't think have ever made a bad album. So coming in at number 6, I gotta go with The Last Command by Wasp. Top 5 here, let's go with Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good by Megadeth. It's hard to match all the pent-up aggression let out on Megadeth's debut album. Dave Mustaine was out for revenge after being kicked out of Metallica, and he takes it all out on his guitar here on Killing Is My Business. And of course, Megadeth would go on to do a lot more polished work in the future, but the intensity on display on this record is palpable, especially on standout tracks like Love to Death, Killing Is My Business, The Skull Beneath the Skin, Rattlehead, Looking Down on the Cross, and Mechanics as well. This is where, it all started out for Megadeth, and it's a thrash metal essential for sure. And even with the poor production, the album is a stone cold classic, featuring the great lineup of Dave Mustaine, David Ellefson, Gar Samuelson, and Chris Poland. So coming in at number 5 here, we have Killing Is My Business by Megadeth, their iconic debut album from '85. Number 4, Sacred Heart by Dio, the third solo album by Ronnie James Dio, and the final to feature guitarist Vivian Campbell, who was fired midway through the album's tour. This album is more of that classic mystical Dio lyrics on display here, and some absolute classics as well, like the title track, like Rock and Roll Children, Hungry for Heaven, King of Rock and Roll 2. There are so many great songs on here, and it's a little bit of an underrated album compared to his first 2 records as a solo musician, those of course being Holy Diver and Last in Line. But I'd put it right up there with some of Dio's best solo stuff, and his original solo lineup had such great chemistry, and even though cracks were showing in the relationship between Ronnie and Vivian Campbell, this is definitely a stellar record from top to bottom that I enjoy quite a bit. Classic Dio through and through. Wanted to put it in the top 5. Coming in at number 4, let's go with Sacred Heart. Top 3, we have Metal Heart by Accept. This is prime Accept here with Udo Dirkschneider on lead vocals. Also, some great hooks and melodies on display here. One of Accept's best for sure, with standouts like the title track, Living for Tonight, Midnight Mover, Up to the Limit, Dogs on Leads, and Wrong is Right. Just a stellar follow-up to 1983's Balls to the Wall, during a period where it seems like Accept could do no wrong. This is right in the middle of an excellent album run from Restless and Wild through Russian Roulette, and on any given day, this could be my favorite Accept album. It changes all the time, but this is just great stuff here by the band, and it's all killer, no filler for sure, by the German metal legends. So getting a start in the top 3, gotta go with Metal Heart by Accept. Number 2, Bonded by Blood by Exodus. In my opinion, the greatest thrash metal debut of all time, and you had a lot of great thrash metal bands really coming into their own during this time, and Exodus were right at the top of that list, and Bonded by Blood was a tight, concise effort for their debut album, and while lots of thrash debuts sound dated all these years later, Bonded by Blood still feels fresh to this day. Such an aggressive listen from beginning to end here, with some awesome vocals by Paul Baloff on his only full-length studio album Exodus appearance here, but he absolutely kills it. And some standout tracks on this record for me include the title track, Exodus, and Then There Were None, A Lesson in Violence, Metal Command, Piranha, Deliver Us to Evil, Strike of the Beast as well. I mean, so many great songs on here, just one of the best and most important thrash albums of all time. But there can only be one, and in my opinion, the best album released in 1985 has got to be the classic Live After Death by Iron Maiden. One of the greatest live albums in metal history. Live After Death is Iron Maiden at the peak of their power, with the classic lineup of Bruce Dickinson, Steve Harris, Adrian Smith, Dave Murray, and Nico McBrain, just firing at all cylinders here on the Power Slave tour. And it still holds up to this day as Maiden's best live offering, and the band were just so tight and aggressive on this tour. Classic renditions of tracks on here. There's some of my favorites like Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, The Trooper, The Flight of Icarus, Rime of the Ancient Mariners, great. Power Slave, Number of the Beast, Hallowed Be Thy Name is a killer version from this record. So is Running Free and Run to the Hills as well. So, I'm extremely envious of anybody who was able to see Maiden on the Power Slave tour. I have some family who were in attendance to see Maiden live at Radio City. They did a handful of shows there in New York City on this tour, and I'm very jealous of that. That just sounds so immensely cool, but I'm a bit biased because Maiden are my favorite band, but far and away, my favorite release from 85 has got to be Live After Death, coming in at number 1 here on the list. I guess you could say Bonded by Blood is the best studio release of 85, but in general, including live albums, coming in at number 1 has got to be Live After Death by Iron Maiden, and yes, I am definitely biased. So that wraps up this video here, counting down my top 20 favorite rock and metal releases of 1985, turning 40 this year. Can't believe it's the new year, 2025. Hope you guys had a great New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and I wish you guys the absolute best in the new year. I'll be sticking with you on the channel. Right now, I sound terrible. I feel terrible. I have a cold, but wanted to get this video out to you guys, so I hope you enjoy it, and I definitely want to hear from you guys down below. What are some of your favorite rock and metal releases turning 40 this year? Let me know in the comments section. I want to hear from you. Also, I'll be doing videos similar to this for albums turning 50 and albums turning 30 as well, so 1970 and 1990s as well. So I'll be doing that in the next few days, and so I'm definitely looking forward to counting those down. 75 and 95 were really great years too, but you guys can see my picks right over here for 85. These are some great classic records. Turning 40 is kind of hard to believe, right? But these bands celebrating 40 years with these classic records, and so wanted to talk about that here today. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.